Okay, so back into our series. We've been looking through the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. And I have said before that if we were to go every section by section, we would be here for 2 years. Each different portion of his recommendation and his counsel to the church is full of so many different cultural assumptions and strange issues going on that really what I decided to do was to try to pick out big themes. And the more I read the book, the more I realize that was a good choice. Because like I said, almost every passage is very complex if you take it on its own terms. You'll see what I mean when we get to the section that we're going to deal with today. I've even been listening to the book in the car. I happen to have the Bible on a set of CDs. So it's easier that way. You don't get caught up in the small stuff. You hear the big issues. So I want to reaffirm that what we're doing is looking at big themes. And today we're going to take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 5. So please turn there if you have a Bible handy. You remember what's going on in Corinth. Corinth was a congregation that was established by the Apostle Paul. After a while he moved on to other places, but he would get reports and they would send him letters about things taking place there. They had a lot of different problems that were related to new believers who were left on their own. So Paul would address the problems, and what we are trying to do in the series is something that I call reverse engineer them. Remember? We're looking at what the problem was and trying to flip it on its side to see what things should have been like, right? What the ideal should be by looking at the problem and turning it upside down. So we'll take a look at chapter 5 today and see what we can reverse engineer from that. So take a look at chapter 5, starting at verse 1. Paul says, "It is actually reported that there is immorality among you, and immorality of such a kind as does not exist even among the Gentiles." So stop right there. So this is a group of people that had been brought out of their former lack of faith, right, in the true God, in the God of Israel. They had been worshiping all kinds of different gods. They were what we would sometimes call pagans. Here, Paul is saying, even the Gentiles, even people on the outside, are not doing what you're doing. That's how bad it was. Inside the church, right? So what could it have been? It says, the next clause, that someone has his father's wife. Now that's a strange expression right there, right? And you can get all kinds of ideas from that. But let me cut to the chase. Basically, what seemed to have been happening is that there was a stepmother. The father had married someone else after this young man was born. And somewhere along the line, his father got divorced from the stepmother. And now the young guy himself was either living with the mother or got married to the mother or something. And that was considered really repugnant in those days. Now let me tell you why I say it that way. When I was a young person, I moved away from home at age 19. No, I didn't live with anybody's stepmother. That's not what I'm leading up to. But I moved to a college town, and one of the other students there actually didn't live in the dorm. He lived with his parents. So I would visit, I know the parents. His father was, old enough to be the father of a college student. But the mother, with the second wife, was only a few years older than we were. She must have been like 23. The father must have been about 45. So suppose that father had gotten a divorce from the stepmom, and then my friend, suppose he had gotten involved sometime later with the stepmom. We would think that that's pretty weird, right? But we wouldn't think it was immoral necessarily. Am I right? Would we think that there's anything so sinful and terrible as Paul seems to make it out here? It just, things happen. So the stepmother was young, the father divorced, and so the son who maybe grew up with the stepmom was in love with the stepmom. Who knows why, right? So we would think it's kind of strange, but it's not necessarily immoral. Would you agree? I go into that issue here for one reason. To illustrate the fact that there are two kinds of things that we could call moral, things that are universally right and wrong, no matter what time and place you live in. And then there's other things that are considered wrong in your own setting, right? So that's all I'm saying by going into depth about that. So in any case, we get the clear idea of what was going on. This young person, I guess he was young, was living with his former stepmother. Okay, so that was the problem. Then in verse 2, it explains even worse. Paul is writing to the church and he says, not only have you let this happen, but you have become arrogant and have not mourned instead, so that the one who had done this deed would be removed from your midst. So there's two problems here. Not only is a young guy living with his former stepmother, or with his stepmother, whatever, but the church doesn't seem to even care about it. You get that? And Paul is saying, not only should you think so highly of yourselves, that you're such great Christians, you actually should be mourning this, and you should have taken steps to get rid of this guy, right? The one who had done this deed should be removed from your midst. And Paul, in the next verse, says, that's what he would have done. He says, for I, on my part, although I am absent in body, but present in spirit, have already judged him who has committed this, as though I were present. In the name of the Lord Jesus, now he gives him the instruction. In the name of the Lord Jesus, when you are assembled, and I am with you in spirit, with the power of the Lord Jesus, I have decided to deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of his flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Now this is all pretty strange language to us. Would you agree? What does he mean, first of all, when he says, I'm not present, but I'm with you in spirit? Now, if you took that in the first statement, it would seem, look, I'm on your side, I'm with you, I have you in my thoughts. You know, we use the expression too, right? Someone's going for a test, and we have to go to work that day. And we say, we're with you in spirit, right? That's a common expression. But in verse 4, he says, when you are assembled, and I am with you in the spirit. It almost suggests as if he's somehow present there, right? Now, I'll be honest with you, I didn't observe this until this morning when I realized, I said, hey, this is another complication in this passage that I didn't even have a chance to look at while I was preparing the sermon. So I'm going to have to leave that off to the side. But I'm mentioning it here only to show you how strange and how much work we would really have to do if we went through this letter piece by piece, right? So just put off to the side, because the verses I did focus on is the next one, verse 5. What does he mean when he says, I have decided to deliver this person, such a one, to Satan for the destruction of his flesh, so that his spirit may be saved? That's pretty unusual ideas for us. So basically what he's saying is you need to disfellowship this guy, right? You got that idea. Disfellowship means break them away, send them away from the fellowship of the community. Another word that we're used to is excommunication, right? In other words, kick the guy out of the community, right? But what is this thing about delivering his body to Satan, that the flesh, delivering him to Satan so that his flesh may be destroyed? To cut to the chase, essentially in that day and age, what they felt was when you joined the church, you were leaving the domain of Satan. That was the whole idea. Satan was the god of this age, right? The god of this world. And so when people came out of their pagan worship and joined the church, they were basically extricating themselves from the domain of Satan. So when Paul is saying, okay, if somebody's still doing this kind of thing in the church, then the best thing to do is kick them out for a while. Let him go back to the domain of Satan, so that he for the destruction of the flesh. Now the word flesh, there's a lot of different Greek words that are overlapping. This is not the word for body. This is the word for flesh, which could have the connotation of the evil nature. So basically what Paul is saying, look, you have somebody in your congregation that's doing the most heinous thing that you could think of in that culture. Even the Gentiles don't do that. And yet you're just going along like nothing's wrong. He's saying, no. Here's what you have to do. Somebody is so bold as to make an error like that, kick him back, kick him out of the church, let him go back into the pagan world so that he can learn to subdue these evil tendencies. Right? I think this makes sense. You know, if you get lost in any of the other possibilities, you just go deeper and deeper into things that we can't understand, you know. So I'm going to accept that. I say all of that because there's a theme embedded in this passage. Let me read the next couple of verses and you'll see what I'm saying. 6 through 8. Your boasting is not good. Remember what I said? They were boasting because they thought they were fantastic Christians. And yet they were letting this happen. Paul says, your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? Leaven is like yeast, right? If you have a little bit of yeast and you mix it in a small part of dough, what's going to happen? It's going to infiltrate the whole thing. So he's saying, you don't get it. If you have one person in your group that's doing bad things, that's going to rub off on everybody else. It's going to corrupt the whole nature of it's going to corrupt the nature of the whole group, right? Clean out the old leaven, so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Christ our Passover also has been sacrificed. Now, he's referring to the Passover. In Jewish tradition, on the night that Moses and the Israelites were delivered from Egypt, they were instructed to make quick bread, no yeast, no waiting around for it to leaven, and eat the lamb standing up, I understand, right? If I remember it correctly. And be ready to leave. So ever since then, thousands of years ago, Jewish people have been observing this every year. Eating unleavened bread, eating quickly, eating certain kinds of blends of herbs, right? To remember the Exodus from Egypt. Paul is connecting that with what happened to the believers in Corinth. They were brought out of the domain of Satan, right? They escaped from spiritual Egypt. They were now in this company of people who belong to Yahweh, the Creator God, right? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were now in his fellowship. And Paul is saying to him, you're like a new lump of dough. You shouldn't have yeast. And in this case, it's pretty clear. The yeast symbolizes evil, right? Get rid of the evil. You're a new, pure lump of dough. And therefore, in verse 8, he says, let us celebrate the feast, not with the old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Okay, so that's the passage. Took me a little bit longer to go through it than I thought. Because really what I want to emphasize in this passage is this. The church, just like Israel before, is called to purity and holiness. The church is called to a certain quality of character and experience. It's just barely hinted at here in verse 8. We're not supposed to participate in malice and wickedness, but we are supposed to manifest sincerity and truth. So those are the only two adjectives here to give us an idea of what Paul is talking about. But the point I want to make is this. This passage and other passages in Corinthians, as I have been listening to them, all bring out the point that the church has a calling to holiness. The church has a calling to be different, to be exemplary, to show certain qualities that are not like what they were before.
Right.
All right, so that's the theme of all of this old style, crazy cultural things that we just read here. I want to emphasize this one point. The church has a calling. The calling is towards holiness. In 1 Peter chapter 1, I want to just jump there to show that it's not just something that Paul was concerned about, but it's something that's universal in the New Testament. Maybe you read these verses today. I missed some of the Sabbath school. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 14 to 16, Peter says this, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours during the time of your ignorance, but like the one who called you, get that, like the one who called you, be holy yourselves, also in all your behavior, because it is written. Where is it written? In the Old Testament, right? A number of places. Leviticus, Deuteronomy. It is written, you shall be holy. This is God speaking to the people. You shall be holy because I am holy. Right? You get that? This is a theme that runs throughout the Old and New Testaments together. The people of God in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament are called by God's grace. They're brought into his fellowship on the basis of God's generosity. But they're invited to a certain quality of experience. And I'm using the word today, holiness, to describe that, or holy. The theme is that the people of God are supposed to be exemplars of goodness, righteousness, and holiness. Both things that apply universally throughout time, and even things that show their goodness in their own cultural setting. That's the emphasis I want to bring out today from the letter to the Corinthians. We are called to be holy. Now, I want to just back up from here. This is a touchy subject, you could say, in some ways. I'll tell you why. Within the Christian church, often when we hear about holiness, it gets sort of mixed in and tangled together with the basis of our inclusion in God's people. You know, and this is traditional. It's a fine line between what we're called to and how we get there, right? So as you've heard me preach for more than 2 years already, we are brought into the fellowship of God's people strictly on God's invitation, on the basis of God's invitation and on the basis of what Jesus himself accomplished as a human being. For Adam, for Israel, Jesus accomplished the faithful life that God desired from his people. So he invites us to join him in that accomplishment. We are part of God's people already. We don't have to worry about that. So, but in that fellowship, we also are called to participate in a certain quality of being. That's what I'm trying to say here today. And I want to remind us that this is a valid main principle that we find in the Old and New Testaments. Yes. God calls us by his grace, but we are called to a certain type of experience. And the word so far I'm using is holy, or holiness. I didn't explain what that is yet. We'll get to that. I just want to say that we have to acknowledge and recognize, first of all, that though we are called by grace, as we are, God's big come as you are party, right? We're called as we are. No strings attached, no fee, but we're called into a certain experience. It's called holiness. Holiness doesn't just complicate things in the church, but holiness as a word, I think, is not very popular in regular everyday society now. In our culture in general, who uses the word holiness? When you hear the word holiness, what kind of associations go with people? Don't you get the idea that holiness means all the things that you can't do? Am I right? You know, a lot of times when we hear the word holy or purity, instead of thinking about what it might be like on a positive level, we think about everything we can't do anymore. And especially in society, I think they have this idea. And maybe as Christian church, we don't help matters either. Because often what we do when we enter society, when we make ourselves known in the political process or in the social process, we're out there telling everybody what they can't do.
Holier than thou.
Yeah, and we have this idea of a hierarchy. That's kind of what Lena was getting at. It's like we're the good ones, you are not. We're holy. So this word is mixed up with a lot of negative connotations both in the church and in the regular society. That's why today I titled the sermon, Positive Holiness. I want to spend the rest of the time talking about what is the word holy. What does the word holy mean? What do the word holy and holiness mean in a positive way? I want to try to describe it as something that we can pursue, rather than be oppressed by it. Something that we can do because we want to do it genuinely, from the heart, not because we're being pressured to do it. So that's my goal. With all of that background, what exactly is holiness when it's expressed in a positive manner? Well, in the Corinthians chapter 5, it uses two words, abstract words. It says sincerity, it says truth. So those are qualities of holiness when you think about it. Positive qualities of holiness. Don't you think most people in the world, with some wacky exceptions, psychopaths maybe, appreciate people when they're sincere? And that you can trust them, right? They're truthful enough that you can take them at their word. Isn't this like a universal value? So maybe if we presented holiness in those terms, people wouldn't be so put off by it. Sincerity, truth. How about some other words? We've talked about these before. Being holy means you're faithful. If you make a commitment to somebody, you back it up. You keep it. Whether it's your brother, your spouse, your next door neighbor, your employer, you make a commitment to somebody and you back it up. You do what you say. I think that's a part of holiness. That's a good thing, wouldn't you say? How about some other words? You're dedicated. Dedicated to good causes. Dedicated to the well-being of people. Dedicating to getting the job done well. Dedicated to being honest. Dedicated to promoting wellness in the society. Taking care of the planet. You can talk about all of those things. These are, in my opinion, positive definitions of what it means to be holy. Yeah, let me back out here. We use the word a lot, holy. There's a lot of words that we use and we assume we know the meaning, but we never really stop to clarify it or define it clearly. So this is what I'm trying to say. When we think of the word holiness and holy, what we're supposed to be, do we think that means we're supposed to be faithful and dedicated? Or, as I said before, does it often mean, well, we're supposed to be holy, therefore I can't, do such and such? That's what I'm getting at. The other word for holy that I think that comes up a lot is purity. I said that before, but what is purity anyway? I'd like to say that purity really is focus, being focused. If I really want to be a successful writer, let's say, and I want to write a novel, I don't want to write a novel, but let's say I do, right? What do I have to do? I got to spend a lot of time. I taught creative writing classes in Bangkok when I was a high school teacher there. And there's a lot of dimensions to creative writing, characterization, dialogue, getting the plot right, and they get down to the point where you choose every word that you write on the page. That takes time, right? If I'm always, taking hikes in the forest or getting distracted to watch the news, I'm not focused enough to get the job done. So I think holiness is kind of like that. Not to produce a novel, but to build up people, to stay faithful. It's like keeping your focus clear. I like these words. These are what I say, positive definitions of the word holy and holiness. It's a commitment to promoting wellness and love and peace. That's how I would define holiness.
Right.
Holiness is keeping yourself focused enough, clear enough, astute enough that all of your energy, all of your emotional concern, all of your action goes into something that's positive, that builds people up. That's a positive view of holiness, I would say.
Yes.
It's not just a matter of the fact that we can't go bowling on Friday night, It's something bigger than that. It's not just that you can't eat meat boiled in its own milk, to borrow something from the Old Testament. It's not just the things that you can't do, right? It's the things that we should do positively. And then I thought of some other images. Think about Adam and think about Jesus. When Adam was designed, not before sin, he had an identity and he had a task. His identity was to be the image of God. His task was to nurture the earth, right? To fulfill that task then, that's what it means to be holy.
Right.
Think about it. What does it take to fulfill that task? It takes intelligence, thoughtfulness, a certain presence of mind, a certain maturity, right? You're not distracted, you're not confused, you're clear-minded. It takes a certain sense of responsibility, a certain amount of composure. And like I said earlier, it has a commitment, it involves a commitment to nurturing and building up life, both human life and animal life and natural life. This is holiness. And think about Jesus. Jesus was the second Adam, right, we say? The restart of the human race. Now, he didn't live in a garden, so his job wasn't to nurture the plants and trees in exactly the same way, but the same concept was there. To stay faithful to the task that God had given him, to build up people, to make for peace, to live in a way that was wise and focused. This is the positive definition of holiness.
Amen.
All right? You get it? Are you getting it? That's really, I'm using the passage in chapter 5, but as I listen to the whole book of 1 Corinthians, this issue keeps coming back. The people of God are called to be a special type of people. The word that they use is holy. I'm just trying to flesh that out. Not so much in terms of what we can't do, but in terms of what we should do. Positive holiness. It's not a matter of following minute details and restrictions. It's a matter of getting a hold of the vision, following big principles. So in a way, what I'm inviting us to do, holiness is an invitation for us to exercise judgment and clarity and purpose. What do you think about that? Does that sound so terrible? Especially when you know God has already included us, right? God has included us in His family. He's called us now to a positive thing. It sounds beautiful, right? And it should come, here's the thing, it should come from our own internal motivation. If we catch the picture, nobody has to bludgeon us or berate us and lay upon us all these different rules and regulations. That's how I see it. That's what I'm trying to get here. We're called to be exemplary type of people for God. Because that's how He is. Right? God is a certain way. God is holy. I believe God is absolutely committed to doing what's right. I believe God doesn't get distracted by TV shows or movies or, buying that new, I want to say BMW, except I know somebody who got one. So in this congregation, so I don't want to say that. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. God has a focus on what's real and good and best. He's holy because He puts His whole heart into it. He calls us to that. So the church, to sum all up now, the church, like the people of Israel before, are called to a special way of life that represents God. Because we're the people of God. And because this God has a certain character. Right? God is a certain way. God calls us to be His friends. So that means we should be a certain way. Positive holiness. Right. I did look up, we're called by grace, just like the Israelites were. We're secure, we're part of God's people, but we have a commission. We have a goal, just like Adam, right? We have a certain way to live, and it's positive. I want us to see it in a positive way. When online I use a website called BibleHub.org. I don't know how many of you have found it, but it's really good. There are a lot of resources there. I didn't have this in my notes, but I got to tell you about it. You can get the passage that you're reading, and you can click on links to read commentaries and different things. It's really quite a nice site. So I found one commentary on the passages that I was looking up, and listen to what it said. The very thing for which the church exists is the cleansing of the morals of the people and their elevation to a truly spiritual and godly life. Now this is also already a little bit dated in its way of expression, but the main idea is still there. We're called by God in grace, freely, generously, but He has a plan for us. And I think for us to really be excited about it, we have to express it in a positive way. We have to have a positive and accurate definition of holiness. And here's what I'm going to say. It's not a rules-based regimen that details everything we cannot do. Holiness is a principles-based vision of what we should do and what we can be in our role as friends and representatives of God. Here's how I see it. Holy people are people who are composed, faithful, driven by a vision of becoming noble and righteous. Not because somebody's pressuring us, not because we're afraid, but because it's a good thing.
Amen.
Do we want to be noble, good people?
Yes.
Then we should pursue it. That's holiness. Holy people are people who are dedicated to the well-being of the world. Holy people are those who are focused on what's important. People who are wise and people who are good. I call this positive holiness. God calls us to that. And I believe the world needs that.
Amen.